Hi, and welcome to the Operational Edge. This is episode 6. I am Marsha Wisely, your co-host. I am joined today by my co-host, David Lee. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
Doing good. Okay, so for today, we thought that we would shake things up a little bit, do something different. We've been having some technical discussions, and we were just recently talking about our careers. And um, I remembered that on a trip down to visit Missouri S&T for an ISA presentation, we were talking with some of the students down there, and it really seems like when you're graduating college, and this is something that I had kind of forgotten, it seems like you're picking what you're going to do for like the rest of your life. And that does not necessarily, it could be true if you like it and want to do that forever. You could certainly do that. That is not what has happened for me and David, and for a lot of folks. You do something, you graduate, get your first job, and then you kind of figure out what you like, don't like, and you might go deep technical, you might go broader. And so we thought we might just talk a little bit today about our personal career development and give some insight into what some different paths could look like in this kind of industrial automation space. So that'll be the topic today. And David, we were talking a little bit earlier, from the perspective of like deep versus broad. I certainly lead a little bit more broad, but you've had a very deep technical career, which for a lot of engineers is kind of appealing, right? We're tinkerers and thinkers. We like that kind of thing. So can you talk a little bit about, your career journey and how you've been able to keep your career interesting, perhaps,
hmm
while staying very deep technical?
I think one of the things that's always kept me going is I always make the comment that when I stop learning, I'll retire. Unfortunately, I'm getting a bit closer to retirement now, so that might actually happen. But that's one of the key things to me was that I've always wanted to learn. And you can stay in the deep technical and learn. I've certainly done many different types of technical roles, but also getting a bit further afield. Getting into those sales roles, getting into maybe business development, those roles which you've had. Keeps you fresh, but also gives you a different perspective, I think, on the engineering role too. It's certainly true that every engineer is a salesman. I mean, that's just by default. You're out there, you're trying to sell your projects, or you're trying to sell to a client, or whatever it is, even as an engineer. So I mean, there's elements of different parts of different career paths that always come across, that are important. So don't think too many engineers these days sit at a drafting board designing heat exchangers. And there's a lot of good tools for that now. So chemical engineers, that's maybe an archaic view of what we do. But there's lots of different opportunities, and it starts way back at college. So I guess a question: how did you get into chemical? How did you choose chemical engineering as your degree?
I feel like my story is very similar to a lot of college students, which was like, I liked chemistry. I actually had a high school professor who I really liked, Dr. Lavoie, who he had gone and gotten his PhD, obviously. And when I was doing some independent study working with him, I told him that I wanted to be a chemist, and he said, get a, go into a field where you can get a job. So either be a pharmacist or be a chemical engineer. And so, like many chemical engineers, it was okay. I could make money. I can do something kind of interesting. And I didn't choose pharmacy because it was easier to go from engineering to pharmacy than vice versa. And a lot of my decisions in my career were really to keep doors open. And so from the very beginning, my first co-op was in process simulation. Uh, I I did have options, but I picked process simulation because I liked the idea of, like you said, it's things are so much more interesting when you get to keep learning. And so I didn't have to pick a specific industry. I could learn lots of industries. That's why I ended up in industrial automation. I didn't have to pick. The simulation company I worked for was Mina Technologies. They ended up getting acquired later, but it was a small company, and so it just made more sense to go with a bigger company because again, more doors were
Mhm.
open. And as I've continued through my career, uh, I've made several moves similar to that, where it was, okay, what can I learn? How can I stay more broad? And then, but now I'm kind of figuring out like, okay, well, I liked this. I didn't like this other piece, and trying to figure out like, what is it that I want to do next in my career?
I guess I sort of had a similar sort of approach, but I really wasn't going to do chemical engineering. I was a language student, and in Britain, the way education goes, at least in my day, at 16 you had to make a decision on what you wanted to concentrate on for what were called A levels to get to a university degree. I was studying languages, and that's what I thought I was going to do for a career. And my career advisor said there's no future, much like the chemistry sort of thing.
Yeah.
You won't be able to get a job. And I was doing maths, chemistry, and physics. So they said, well, chemical engineering. Like, okay, and that was it.
Yeah.
Really had no idea, thinking it was all chemistry and maths, and it's all physics.
Yeah, just putting molecules together. Just it's definitely very different. Even the actual field of chemical engineering is very different than what I had in mind when I was in high school. But I don't know that I've ever met an incoming freshman who didn't have a parent in chemical engineering that actually really understood what it was.
That's very true. Yeah. I don't think I really knew until the second summer when I had a job on a Corvair plant. And I actually get on the plant and I could see equipment and I could see processes, and it was sort of, I think it dawned then what it really was. But until then, it was a lot of mathematics and physics and chemistry, and it really didn't have that I guess that physical aspect to it that you could see and picture what was going on. So it's not an easy degree by any means. It certainly covers a lot of ground, and you get to touch on all sorts of different topics, and they prepare you very well for sort of a very varied role in your career. So I think that's a good aspect of the degree.
It is, and I feel like for industrial automation, chemical engineering is a great basis because everybody has a gap there are a few programs that I think are now starting to be more targeted at the whole thing. But when you're just starting out, it kind of is this combination of double E and chemi. And you either walk in knowing how a batch might run or a process might run, which is important for some of the higher level logic, which was us. Or you walk in the door understanding inputs and outputs and kind of that very close to the field layer. And everybody has to bridge that gap at some point if they don't walk in with both. So that was one of the appealing things too, is just constantly getting to kind of learn and do different things. So I guess, was there any time in your career where you wanted to make a change and like actively made a choice to either learn a new technology or kind of get into a different space? I know that you have a lot of experience in alarms and some of the operational readiness type technologies. So was that an active choice, or were you just sort of, did your career just naturally develop?
I guess it was to a certain extent. I mean, when I first started, I was on a plant. So I was I started off as a chemical engineer and then went into automation. And the only reason I got into automation was we had a project come up, PLC conversion. And my boss at the time said to me, "You're young, you can do the automation." And that was the only, so I went ahead and did it. And I was very lucky that the plant I was in had pneumatic controls. So I went from everything from pneumatic controls through single loop controllers, multi-loop controllers, PLCs to DCS and batch sequencing. So I really never had any, I guess, plans to get into these technologies. It just sort of happened. But I also did project management. I was responsible for projects in those fields, so project management. And there was one time when I saw a need. There was a lot of, back in the mid-90s, I guess, when IT was becoming more of a function on the site, and there was a separate department, and I actually requested that they fall under my automation group, and they actually gave me that. So sometimes you can ask, and you'd be surprised what you might get. So it was interesting having an IT group working for me for a while, and that sort of complemented and made me learn some different technologies and terminologies and all those things that maybe I wouldn't have gone into. So it certainly hasn't been a plotted or planned career path.
I think that's an interesting thing about some of the careers paths that I've seen as well is like sometimes it's just dictated by the projects that come in, right? Whether you're
Mhm.
at a site or whether you're at a contractor, it kind of comes down to what are we doing today and who is around and I've certainly become the expert in something because there wasn't an expert and I was the
Yeah.
first one to do it, in my building or whatever.
I was lucky enough to get into operations later on. So after about 15 years, I got into operations management. And that's how I ended up in the States. They brought me over here for a temporary assignment. This is 25 years ago, so it's a long temporary assignment, but we're still here. Um, but the idea was I'd train up on the sister site and then go back as a site manager in the UK. Unfortunately, at the time they sold the site off in the UK, so I had a choice to stay in the US or go back to the UK. So we stayed in the US, and to me that's a decision we'd never regretted. But again, it was an opportunity to do something different, learn the operation management side of things. I had a maintenance team reporting to me as well as operations, quality control, and those things. So it's, again, another opportunity to learn some stuff, and I just loved it. Just giving me a chance um, to learn from others.
So has that been your motivation most of the time to learn something different? Like for project management, I guess, is there a specific thing, like if somebody was thinking that that might be the next step in their career, what would you say would make somebody perhaps love or hate the project management space? Because there's a lot that happens there and it's very different from what you do as part of a project, right?
Yeah, it's a
And I've
mindset.
never done
I think
that.
project management. It's it can be very detail oriented. There's obviously a lot of interactions with different disciplines, but again, that's a good role for a chemical engineer because you learn a bit about civil, you learn a bit about mechanical, you get an appreciation of the other engineering disciplines. So that certainly helps. There is a very big difference between project engineering and technical expert. It's not for everybody, and um, there's some good classes, and you can become qualified in. And if you like that sort of day to day minutia, if you like, or the stress that comes with it, is a very good job. And but you are still part of a team, and often you're leading that team
Mhm.
in different aspects. So it's a very rewarding role when you get into it.
Absolutely. I've had some great project managers too, where, they really made the project a success because they were able to, there's a lot of scope protection, right? Which is important because not every engineer is ready to have those difficult conversations with the customer to say, this is not in our proposal or this is not, technically part of what we've agreed to. And so having a project manager that has enough technical understanding to say, customer, let's look at these two different pieces, or contractor, let's look at these two different pieces and figure out how we can come to an alignment that really makes the project work, but also is respectful of our existing scope.
But you and I talked about it beforehand. Unless you're a big multinational, have contract departments and legal departments, project management often deals with the minutiae of contractual work. Looking through contracts, looking
Mhm.
through scope documents, bid documents, and all those things, which again can take a different mindset than as I'm working on an engineering project. So you've been through
Mhm.
that recently. It's not always a lot of fun, right?
Yeah, we were talking earlier because since I own my own company, I run my own contracts and I have a legal department but I review them myself as well. And yeah, it is a lot of little details. And um, I was never in project management, but that would certainly give you that skill set as well if you ever thought that you wanted to own your own company and kind of be in charge of your career in that kind of way. I learned that particular skill set from one of my roles in business development. Very kind of similar in terms of all of the minutia, but more leaning towards, instead of scope management in terms of project, leaning towards relationships and working with sales and kind of helping to grow the business and managing customer expectations. So by, you know, when I think about how I became uh, president of my company and started all of this and what I think has made me successful. Having some of those experiences, even though like sales is not my forte in particular. Like I like people and I like working with people and I like consulting with people. I would say that I'm better at business development because I would say that that's more like let's talk together and grow this together. Sales is a little bit more like you have to close the deal, right? And hit certain numbers and things like that. And of course, I have to manage some of that as an owner of my business, but it is a smaller piece, and I'm able to recognize that I'm fortunate to have gained those skills from working in business development, working tightly with sales, building those skills in contracts, in presenting to customers, while also appreciating that, like, that's not where I like to spend most of my time. So, there's certainly a lot of lessons to be learned by exploring some of these different roles. You did business development as well, David. I guess, is there something that you really enjoy about that, or something that, maybe you'd leave to the side if you have the choice?
Yeah, that's not I have done the role, but it's not really something that sort of really excites me. But
Yeah,
as I said, everybody's a BDM when you're working on a project or you're working on the
sure.
side, or leading a company, as both of us do. It's sort of that's inbuilt into what you do.
It is.
And I guess because I've been doing this for a long time, but you're relatively newer in the industry. I mean, who do you look to and say, okay, what if I need some advice? Do you have people say, okay, do I look on the internet? Do I have networking? How do you get sort of those pieces of advice that be valuable to you?
So I have always focused on my network.
Mhm.
So it's easy, I think, as an engineer who sits behind a desk, especially in a world where remote work is such a big opportunity, whether it's 5 days a week or 3 days a week, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
But the water cooler talks are so
Mhm.
important. A lot of my connections that have actually enabled me to do this business in the first place are because I was, walking around the office. I stay in touch with a lot of my connections from my, decade working in a large company. That's, us staying in touch is how we're here on the call right now.
Mhm.
Um, but I think learning from and just kind of connecting with other people, and um, it's I think very underrated these days. Those water cooler talks, being able to just have that opportunity to network and connect and say, like, what were the things that you did and didn't like about these different roles. I have friends who have said that they wanted to be subject matter experts who are, similar kind of spot in their career to me. And then they asked me if they should apply for a business development role. And I think that that's great that they asked the question, because I would be happy to tell you the things that I liked and I didn't like about that, right? So it's the question of, what are you trying to get out of this, right? If you want to get more experience, if you think you want to be in more of like a leadership role, either in a big company or your own company, then yeah, absolutely, right? Or if you just want to understand more about like why your project looks the way that it looks, right? Then being closer to sales is helpful, because there are reasons that decisions are made. Sometimes as an engineer, I think that's a little bit hard to understand if you just end up getting brought into the project and you're like, why the heck did we do this? It's like, well, there might be a really good reason that we did it that way. There might not have been budget. Maybe the project wouldn't have moved forward if we hadn't made a particular decision. And so being able to kind of understand like where you are in your career and do personal assessments, and then
Mhm.
say, how could I gain the skills that I want to move forward? Whether that's, I just want to learn new stuff. You can learn new stuff by kind of doing some of the things that you did, David, and move around into different departments and learn all kinds of different technology. Or you can, we've both been in business development. I spent some time in product marketing. There's a lot of opportunity once you kind of have that base layer, I think, of your career, whether it's industrial automation, chemical engineering, whatever technical field you're in, to sort of look at who are the people I interact with, and what skills do they have that I'd like to learn, right?
Mhm. And you have a new set of challenges, things like HR and all those things that maybe you've
Yeah.
not had leadership of a company and the HR and all the stuff that goes with that. So there's learnings whatever you do. And I guess that's a challenge, and maybe a good thing too for you to look towards that.
Yeah, I would say that owning your own company is certainly like, if that's something that anyone is interested that happens to be listening, feel free to ping me because that is a whole kind of journey on its own.
Yeah.
Um, but it has been really fun, but yes, it is certainly for someone who is interested in being very broad, right? I have a technical background, so have done control systems and simulation. But the fact that I did move around and have some of that diversity of experience helps a lot. And uh, I have to want to wear more hats, right? So I wear my engineer hat, I wear my business development hat, I wear my HR hat, I wear my IT hat. I have a whole closet of hats now. If you don't want to wear that many hats, owning a business is not for you. And that is
Yeah.
totally okay, right? There's a lot of ways to do this, or you can just, I've kind of taken a bigger approach to owning a business. You can just run an LLC and kind of keep things simpler. But there is still a whole journey associated with that. You still deal with contracts. You still deal with how am I going to invoice? All of those little details and pieces are fun to learn if you're interested in learning them. But if what you want to do is technical stuff, I think, I once heard someone say that the only way to grow your career as an engineer is to like move up, as in like go into management or something like that. And I completely disagree. There's so much new technology with everything in digital transformation. There are so many flavors of technology, whether it's supporting operations or all of the data pieces, whether it's simulation, power and grounding. There's so much scope. You can keep learning just different technical scopes your whole career if you want to keep learning. So I think that is perhaps narrow-minded.
But I think you look at industry. I mean, we went through industry 4.0, still going through it. Industry 5.0 is coming up now, right? So I mean,
I was going to say people keep wanting to say Industry 5.0. So.
it's like, look, okay. So, but then that gives you an opportunity. So I go, well, what does that mean? What does that, is
Mm-hmm.
that something that I want to get into? Cybersecurity, go back 15, 10 years even, cybersecurity wasn't as big as it is now. I mean, people were aware of it, but it's really become almost a discipline of its own. But it spawned, a lot of it spawned from control system people or IT people into those fields. So, but again, just look for those opportunities and see, like, I'm interested in that. Some of it might be a little over your head. I know it's some of the subjects I get into. It's like, wow, I don't have an appreciation for this, and I'm not sure I ever will. But at least I can speak the language. I can talk, hopefully, somewhat intelligent about it, even if I'm not an expert. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that you have to try and keep abreast of what's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in terms of like taking that curiosity and turning it into like a bigger career, the other maybe piece that I would keep in mind is that um, whether you go deep technical or whether you go more broad, it doesn't really matter. Is that like the only person advocating for your career is you, unless you're very lucky. The fact that you said yes to that controls job early in your career, right? Not everybody, like, you didn't have to say yes. I mean, maybe you did. Like sometimes you get handed an assignment. It's not really like your choice, but sometimes it is. Or they want, there's people asking for you to raise your hand, asking for hands who's interested in learning something new. I think that is a lot of why my career has been as dynamic and as interesting as it has been, is that I will look at, I will sit down and think about what are the things that I'm excited about that I'm doing, what are the things that I don't really like that I'm doing, and kind of really do like a mind map. Because I would say that to assume that there is a typical career in engineering is naive. Everybody's looks a little bit different for various reasons. So you're asking yourself, like, what do you want your next step to look like? What are you most interested in? And if you are working for someone else, then make sure that that's known. I've had a lot of really interesting opportunities provided to me because I was very vocal about what I wanted, and I think I was one of the few that were. Um,
Mhm.
There was a project, it was internal. There was an interactive plant environment that they built at a Rosemont facility at Emerson, and I got to be the virtualization person and the Delta V person and the simulation person, and I got to do loop checks. I got to do so much scope on that project because they knew that I was excited and that that was something that I wanted to do. Technically, I was the lead engineer, and I was like 2 years out of college because the scope was really small. So, like, you never know what weird different projects will come up if you advocate for yourself and bring that forward. That's not the only project like that came up where it was just some weird assignment. I was available and I got to do something pretty neat and get experience earlier than I might have otherwise. So I think, yeah, saying yes, but knowing what you want to say yes to, perhaps, is also good advice.
And I had a similar story back in the 90s. I did my first controller project in 94, I think it was. And again, I was a process engineer, control engineer doing an automation project, and they wanted to do a new office building, lab, and a control room. So I said, well, just add it to this project and I'll manage it. And that's the first control room I did. Was it perfect? That's what I do for a living now, but was it a perfect control room? Maybe not, but we've learned a lot since then. It was 30 years ago. But, like you say, take the opportunities. It was a little out of my comfort zone. I had the support of the company to do it and lots of good people around me. So, it was a good opportunity. I think the other thing to maybe consider too is that I know you and I both came from a big company prior to this, very keen on doing things like personality tests and all these things that people always look at the results and say, well, that doesn't look like an engineer. They're too far this quadrant or too far that quadrant or whatever it might be. But engineers come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, we are typically, you can stereotype an engineer as somebody sitting in an office very quietly on their own, getting on with their work. But that's certainly not true of the majority of engineers. And once you find your feet, get out there and look for something interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got was very early in college, and it sort of informed a lot of my future behavior, but was to like make friends with the operators, was the advice. And then I think I've just sort of extrapolated it just generally to like make friends, perhaps, period. Making friends with the operator is certainly important because they know things that nobody else knows about how the system runs or about what they do to make things happen in the plant, because they are the ones that are doing it. And sometimes that is actually what's best, and sometimes it's helpful to understand so that maybe we could do something better. But regardless, it's good to build trust with those folks because they don't have to listen to you, right? They are their own people, and ultimately they're the ones that will run the plant. So it's always good to make friends with them. And also, like, I've had a lot of really good food in control rooms, like lots of reasons to make friends with operators. Just network, because again, you don't know who's going to have who's going to make your life easier or harder down the line.
But what about maintenance folks too? People who are working in maintenance, get to know them. Spent many long nights, commissioning and startups and stuff, and the team, the operators, the maintenance team, the engineers. It's essential that you have a good rapport and you get on well together. I had an engineer. He made a huge mistake. He came in. He was probably on the site for 2 months. An operator questioned him on a detail. I think it was a pump or something. It was troubleshooting. And he turned around and says, "Do you know who I am? I'm an engineer." Of course, that was taken so badly, and he had an awful relationship with operations from on that. Just awful. You got to remember that you're the team, and nobody's better or higher up. But no matter what you are in the organisation, you're all part of that team. And I think it's good to remember that as you go through. So networking, I mean, it's a big word these days, and I think there's a lot of tools, but I know you and I use LinkedIn. Do you have other tools that you use? You phone a lot of people, or you stay in personal touch? What does networking look like? In a modern business environment.
For me, it does mean like picking up the phone and calling folks. A lot of my network is somewhere between like or somewhere closer leaning towards about to retire because I made a lot of friends with the folks that I was learning from. Um, so I pick up the phone and call the folks that have made a big impact on my career. And I love getting to just kind of see where they are, whether they're still doing engineering or whether they've kind of moved on to something else. And I think the thing that I would keep in mind if you are networking, whether it's on LinkedIn or whatever, is like, you know, there's certainly like ancillary value to the person, right? Like I get a lot of value from my network, but like you have to put in to get investment out. And so
Hmm.
I am, so it's because they're, again, it's all people. So to kind of go in selflessly into those relationships and just really like think about like just it's more like I have a lot of friends more than I would say that I have a strong network in a way because I would because they're people that I would bend over backwards to try to make something happen for them if it was under reasonable circumstances. But they're people that I care about that care about me, and so when we need something to happen, we sort of help each other make that happen. I think networking just to network can kind of feel dangerous because it's easy to fall into this kind of car salesman-y kind of vibe.
Hmm.
Classic TV used car salesman. No offense to actual car salesmen, but but just that sort of like inauthentic. I've only talked to you for 5 seconds, and now I'm trying to convince you you're my best friend and you owe me a favor kind of vibe, right? I think it's a lot more valuable for everyone involved to just go in with authenticity and put your best foot forward and make real connections with people. I think that's really what's paid off for me. And that's beyond, I went to a networking event this past week. So St. Louis has a startup week, and I met some folks who were really great, and they own a home like construction business, and like a woman makes these giant balloon arches for like events and things. I just thought to myself, like, what cool businesses. These people are so awesome. And like, you just never know, right? Like, maybe one day my company will be so successful that I will need a giant balloon arch. And that would be the dream. But, just to, like I said, kind of go in without necessarily wanting anything, but just be curious.
Maybe if you think about the stereotypical engineer, that may not be a skill that many of us have. And to be honest, that's a skill that all these years I remain uncomfortable with. But being more of
Hmm.
an introvert, it's interesting to say that that's a sort of mode of operation for you, and you find that works very well. I think maybe we do hide a little bit behind the LinkedIn's and the other platforms, and don't have that personal touch. So
Hmm.
that's a good. It's good.
Yeah. Well, and I think what makes it work is that I'm thinking about it as like a true personal connection, right? That
Mm-hmm.
that networking, that extrovert, like talking to strangers. I don't like talking to strangers, but I can sit down and talk to a person, right? So I went to this networking event, but I'm approaching one or two people at a networking event and making a true and tight personal connection. I'd rather if I'm going to a networking event, I would rather have one real connection than 25-second connections, right? So I think it's all in sort of how you frame it in your mind.
You can be intimidating being at the big conference and just mingling. And conferences do
It
well with
can.
icebreakers and social events and things like that. So again, it's
Mhm.
step outside the comfort zone. Go and have a drink with a group of people, or just sit down at a dinner table over lunch. Again, you can make a lot of fantastic connections that way.
And if that's not your thing, right, and you still want to expand your career, I think, it's just again kind of about that sitting down. What do you want, right? Like, I mean, networking and building my career has made sense for me because I have always wanted to kind of have more control over what was happening in my career and learn different things, not just deep technical things. It sounds like from your perspective, you also have this curiosity that sort of expands beyond just the technical scope, right? So you've also had these different types of opportunities. I know for some of my friends that are engineers, they would rather pick up a new software, right? And maybe that looks different. Maybe that's just identifying that in yourself and having the right conversations at your work, or maybe looking for a job where you can explore that.
And again, I hate to go back to it, but an engineer is not
Yeah.
necessarily a passionate type of person about their jobs. Personally, I am. I do want to make a difference in the fact we're making plants safer and more environmentally friendly, and that's a huge driver for me. Engineering as a whole, industry as a whole, gets a bad rap. People say it's dirty,
Yeah.
it's emitting stuff into the atmosphere, it's unsafe, it's all these things. But as a professional engineer, it's like that's furthest from a thought process. We're in the job because we want to make things safer and more.
Better.
And it's a tough one to hear sometimes when people sort of malign the industry that we're in, because nobody goes out there to make more pollution or make a spill or have an accident. We're all trying to prevent those. So it is a passion. You have to have some level of buy-in and desire to make things better. And in my field, I find that there's an opportunity to do that.
I totally agree. And for me, I think it's definitely on that era of like, how can I help people, right? Because, the people working in these facilities are doing their best to be safe, be productive, and ultimately create the products that we use every day. And so how can I make their lives better? How can I make everything go smoother and more effectively? And ultimately, like you said, like safety is a huge aspect of that as well. So yeah, perhaps that's true too. Simon Sinek has a book called or he talks a lot about finding your why. And so I think if you're looking at like your career and thinking, where should I go next? What should I do next? Maybe that would be a good place to start, is identifying like, what is your why? Why do you do what you do? Or if you don't know, then maybe you can find one.
I think that goes back to your question earlier. Did I enjoy business development? And I guess that I found that hard to connect that passion with the selling exercise. If I'm selling software, what is the goal? Is it to make money on the software, or is it to make the end user who applies an application to it be better? I'd rather concentrate on that, but there's a different focus in that role.
Yeah. I think that's the difference for me too, is like in I think both of our sort of consulting roles now, we get to say, how do I help my customer, as opposed to how do I close the deal? Ultimately, we need to close deals too, right? But we have that opportunity to say, this is more about solving a problem for our customers now in the consulting roles.
Well, we covered a lot of stuff today. A bit of a ramble maybe between over our careers, but hopefully you found some nuggets in there about some of the things that has worked for us. I think both of us enjoy what we do now, certainly. So to get to this point where I've certainly been very blessed with my career. If you have any thoughts, any questions, please drop us a line and make a comment on the videos, and we'd love to hear from you. If you have any stories that you want to tell about your careers or any advice that you have for people, again, please jot it down in the chat or send us an email, and we'll touch on it in another podcast, or we can bring it up as a sort of a question if that arises. But thank you everybody for your time today. Marsha, thank you for sharing with us, and look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.
Thanks, David. Thanks,